foam. Here's kind of the overall outline here, the problem, the summary, some summary of lab studies. Monesin is a hot topic, our recommendations, producer survey, and where we're going to go with it. So Steve showed you these pictures. This is what it really is. This is the scary part. Yes, just a regular pen lighter, yes. But them flames that are coming off, that's them bubbles that are releasing the methane, and you can see the flash, and that's what we're talking about. Only if you're talking over 500,000 gallons or so. And then the ultimate destruction here. All right, foaming needs three things: a gas surfactant stabilizer. Steve went through that already. Okay, the history. If we go back into our notes here, some of our history goes back to the early 2000, 2003, 2004, when we had a couple extension agents call up and said, we're seeing this blue glow across the top of our manure pits. What is it? Well, increased the ventilation, called it good. Last thing we heard about. Then all of a sudden, 2008, we started blowing buildings up. And that's when we really started getting into this thing, on really figuring out what in the world is causing these flash fires, this foam. And we put out a survey, 2009, trying to figure out what in the world was going on. And it just really, really frustrated, because we could take a site that have 3, 4, 5, 6 identical barns on it. 2 would be foaming, 4 would not. Half would be foaming, half not. 2 double wides. 2 pits, double wides. One side would foam, the other side. That just really drives you nuts. But it does take a long time for the foam to build up, and then all of a sudden, poof. All of a sudden you got it there. Very, very sensitive, quick trigger. In our survey, about a quarter of the producers had foam. Quarter of the pits had foam. It was pretty much isolated to the upper Midwest. You started getting into Indiana, Ohio, very rarely. Southern Michigan, very rarely. Eastern Dakotas, eastern Nebraska, down in Missouri, just hardly anything. So it was really pretty much the upper Iowa, southern Minnesota region there. No clue. We tried to relate everything to it. Room, type, genetics, management, diet, nothing. Manure characteristics, crusting, no crusting, pH, solids, nutrients, nothing. Maybe a little bit on the lipid or the fat content in the manure. We did extensive, or I shouldn't say extensive, we're still looking into the bacterial screening. That's very expensive. But we did find some differences in species, and we found some differences in communities of species between the foaming manure and the non-foaming, and I'll leave it at that. As far as the composition, the foam layer is about 75%, maybe twice the solid content. Very, very thick. That's what traps the gases in there. We have developed the foaming index to manure. We kind of took it from the brewery industry, beer, foam. They did expensive research on how to put that right amount of foam in there so it goes over the glass, makes it look good. But anyway, we took that same concept there. And so we can get manure to foam. And the 2 things that we're looking at there or trying to measure is how high the foam goes and then how long it takes to persist once we shut the gas generation off, how long it takes to come back down. Those are the 2 things we're trying to measure. Now, since we don't know really what's going on, we go on a fishing expedition. We're just trying anything that'll break this foam down. Now, for those that really aren't familiar, that's the 4th of July in northern Minnesota. That's what it is. But anyway, we started getting into educated guesses here, trying to figure out what's going to happen. We were really just trying to try anything. Now, one of the things we did is we started adding various components to the manure. We took two different manures, raw manure and digested, coming out of an anaerobic digester that's been stabilized. Well, once it gets stabilized, we can't get it to foam. But on the other hand, everything else, we can get it to foam. And so all these other additions to the manure didn't work except the oil. Well, maybe we're onto something there, and that's what Steve had in his surface tension there, was a little bit of oil. Well, we started going back and we started adding some more things to it. Yeast extract, DDGS, VFAs, trace film, nothing too exciting there. Then all of a sudden, week 4, what happens to our corn oil? Goes over the top of our cylinders there. More foam, and we know what to do with. They're just all background levels there. So what we concluded on this in the lab was that if we're adding oil, no matter what kind of an oil it is, short-term benefits. But in the long term, it makes it worse. And what's happening there is manure is very nitrogen rich. So if we're adding corn oil or any type of an oil, that's carbon. Well, then bacteria says, oh, we got a balanced meal here. We balanced out the nitrogen, so they're going great guns, a lot of foam there. So foam in the short term, getting ready to pump the pits, a little oil might help, but in the long term, that's probably not a good idea. Now, no real impact to these other characters here that we tried playing with. We did start going into this VFA, and that's volatile fatty acids, and we looked at glycerol, which is a 5-carbon short chain, and we looked at oleic acid, which is a 18-carbon chain, long chain. And we started looking at that in the lab. Now, this is what we came up with. Glycerol, no foam. Oleic acid, lots of foam. Glycerol plus oleic acid, lots of foam. Maybe we're onto something here in these long chain carbon molecules that we're adding. So we went back and looked at just oleic acid at various different levels. And we got a fairly nice linear relationship. The more oleic acid, the more foam we got. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, the oleic acid's coming through with the DDGS and the diets, and the nutritionists tell me that that's only about 55 or 50% metabolizable, digestible, metabolized. The other 50% goes through the animals. So it is getting in the pits. Now, we're still dealing with that, trying to deal with these long-term fatty acids in it. Monesin. We did some field research here 2 years ago, 2 falls ago, looking at Monesin, and we borrowed this from beef production. Now, I grew up in the Sandhills in Nebraska, and as a kid, spent a lot of time tubing cattle, getting to get rid of bloat. So this is just happened, I just stumbled across this. But anyway, we fed Rumensin and we fed bloat guard, or Rumensin's the Monesin and the bloat guard's proloxaline there, to reduce frothy bloat in cattle. So we tried those 2 components there, and we took sites where we had 4 barns or 2 double wides. Mainly we had 4 separate rooms there, very, very typical of the industry, so we can have a control and treatments. And then we added the Rumensin directly to the pit, not going through the animal, it's going right into the pit, and calculated out the kind of similar feeding rates that's used in the beef industry, and we ended up with 0 control, 2.5, 5, and 10 pounds per 100,000 gallons of manure. Not pit size of the manure. A second experiment, we added the bloat guard, same procedures. Okay, here's our best site. 4 barns, started out with 20 inches of foam. 6 weeks later, nothing. Our control dropped, didn't drop as fast, but it did drop. So that's pretty encouraging there. Here's a second site. Eventually, 6 weeks, foam's pretty much gone. Doesn't work out quite as well sometimes, and we don't know why it didn't work as here, but eventually, at 6 weeks, it did get the foam down less. Now, the bloat guard or the proloxaline, if you look at there, it went the opposite direction. Foam actually increased in 3 weeks, so we gave up on that. And I'm just guessing that we did not add enough of the material to really make a difference. If you start adding more of the bloat guard, it just becomes expensive, cost prohibitive, and the Moninsin's a lot cheaper there. Okay, safety. Human problems, there's a whole data sheet on material handling safety. It is lethal to pigs. Don't feed it. Don't get it at any spot where there'll be contact with it. And then for you equine horse lovers, you just say the word Moninsin to them and they'll flop over. Anyway. Environmental issues, it is toxic to fish. And ecological, trout 9, sunfish 16. So let's play that what if game. Let's say we got 5 pounds per 100,000 gallons and 50% reduction in a pit. And let's put on 6,000 gallons an acre, and let's say 10% is going to run off. And let's say we got a rainfall of an inch and 75% is going to run off. All that calculates down to 0.018 milligrams per liter, or less than 1% toxic level of the Moninsin in the river or receiving stream. So I don't think from an environmental hazard it's going to be really that big of a deal. The other thing is that the half-life in soil is 7 days. So it dissipates quite quickly. Now, in Minnesota, we've worked with our regulatory people for 2 or 3 years on this. First of all, FDA doesn't deal with it since we're not going through the animal, not touching the animal. Our pollution control, they're not going to make an official statement. They've known it's been being used in the pit, off-labeled. They got bigger things to worry about. They don't think it's going to be an issue. They have not say it's not going to work, we don't want to see it, but they haven't come back and endorsed it either. Our Department of Ag, they're the ones that deal with the pesticide and the licensing and pesticides, and they've labeled it as a non-pesticide, even though those going next door to the pumpers, if you started adding some of those nitrogen conservative, those are classified as a pesticide, and you need a pesticides license. At least in Minnesota you do. The real statement that came out, and they said blowing up buildings is probably a much more of an environmental hazard than a little Moninsin in the manure. So that's kind of the philosophy that our regulatory agency has taken here. The bottom line is what's happening now is producers are adding 1 to 2 pounds, and that's absolute total right after they get done pumping the pit. You got 6-8 inches left in the pit. You got your agitation equipment right there. Right before they pull it out, they dump in a couple pounds of the Rumensin, circulate it around for 10-15 minutes, call it good. That'll last 9-10 months. Some will get a full year out of it before they see any type of foaming there. If you're pumping twice a year, you're in good shape there. Actively, we're still at that 5 pounds per 100,000 gallons. If a pit's pretty full, you're almost dumping a half a bag in, or 25 pounds there. And it takes a week, 2 weeks to respond a little bit. But anyway, it's still working, and that's still our recommendation there. Question always comes up, what about other pit additives? No clue. We've never tested any interaction between other pit additives if you're dumping this in there, so we really don't know what is really going on with other pit additives there. Really haven't looked at it. The other thing, this Moninsin here is a Band-Aid. We really don't know what's causing the foam. We really don't understand it, but we do know that we can knock it down with this chemical. The research, the bloat guard, we're not even recommending that. Okay, Steve alluded to this research direction, this multi-state here, multi-year project. So we're very appreciative that the Iowa pork producers have stepped forward and taken the lead on this. Minnesota pork producers are kind of sheepishly following suit, but they funded this too, not to the same extent. We just got done conducting a survey. We're still conducting it. We're hopefully going to do this again in a couple of years, and we compare this to 2009. But we only had 18 producers. We were a little shocked that we didn't get this much response. I don't know if it's high corn prices, the drought. It's not a concern. We got the problem eradicating priz or some other type of deal. So it's a commercial break. Now, surveys. We need your help. We got 3 different ways here. We've got 3 different ways of doing it. We got the sheet here. Hopefully you can do it in 10, 15 minutes. If you want to fill it out and leave it with me, we'll take it home, add it to the stack, add it to the list. We got a prepaid envelope, self-stamped. All you have to do is fill it out, throw it in the mail. It'll eventually get to us. And then for you computer savvies, we can do it, monkey survey. Why they picked monkey, I don't know. But anyway, the website's on the orange. So please fill it out, send it. Our survey's only as good as what the information that you send it back to us in. So we need to do it. Joe, did you take one? You don't want to fill out the survey? No pigs, huh? Can we get Dale to do it? He doesn't have that many pigs. So anyway, please fill out the surveys and send them back to us, please. Okay, what we do know from these 18 producers is that we got responses from 4 states, representing 102 rooms. 71% were grow finish, 29% wean to finish, and then out of these 102 rooms here, they do represent 80 pits. Some double wide, some multi rooms have use the same pit there. 15 of the producers have had foam. So out of the 80 foaming pits, 39, or out of the 80 total pits, 39 were foaming, or almost half. Whereas in 2009, we only had 28, 29% that were foaming. And I'm guessing it's probably one of those things that those producers that didn't have foam didn't fill out the survey, which would bias it, slant it. But it's still a big issue, still a big problem. Unfortunately, we had 3 producers that had flash fires. And 2 of them dealt with pumping at the agitation, pumping, releasing the methane. And the other one dealt with repair work. When the building was empty, they got in there with some welders and grinders doing some repair works. As far as this survey, checking weekly. Only half of the producers checked weekly. We really encourage to take the 5 minutes weekly as you do your normal routines and just stick your nose in them pits to find out what's going on. Monthly, I think, is too separately. Definitely semi-annually is too far apart. Really definitely need to look at those on a weekly basis. Third of them, summer starts, and then in the fall, about half of the producers start seeing the foam. And that's when they start, pits getting fuller. The foam starts coming up through the slats, this type of stuff. Pumping frequency, 1/3 once, 2/3 twice a year there. To reduce foam, 1/4 of them, nothing, all the way down to pit additives, feed additives, mineral oil. Diesel fuel, 7%. I'd probably discourage that. Our regulatory pollution, they're working with us on the Rumensin, but they kind of put their foot down on that diesel fuel because that ends up on the land. And now all of a sudden you got a fuel spill type of deal. Illinois, Steve talked about Illinois doing this extensive sampling and testing. One of the things that we're trying to get started here is to look at to do some feeding trials. And we are working with Iowa State and the ARS there on some of their feeding trials in the DDGS and their feeding trials there. But we're taking all the samples and kind of doing it as an afterthought of what they're doing. What we would really like to do is formulate the diets where we partition out the DDGS and make some of the microfibers, take some with our oleic acid, really try to look if there's components in the DDGS that's really causing this versus looking at the DGS in general. And we're working with the Corn Growers Association on funding this, and I think they're going to come through with us. Just so you know, what we're looking at here is if we look into a microscope, manure, these are things like 30 years ago. Did you ever think you'd be looking at manure under a microscope? You're nuts. But anyway, under a high-powered microscope there, you can see these fibers in there that we're talking about, these microfibers that are coming through with the corn and the DDGS. and that's what holds them bubbles. That's our theory that holds them bubbles together.